Team Chrome!
The Yugioh metagame is a complex and historical place. It's not hard to see the depth of the metagame when even the first couple of years have a 2-hour documentary on them. With this history and complexity also comes controversy, and that's what this video is about. We're going to look at the current metagame format and talk about 5 cards that are causing a lot of controversy right now. Before we begin though, this is the first video being uploaded to the Team Chrome Yugioh channel, and you are one of the pioneers that found it in the sea of Yu-Gi-Oh videos. So like any good pioneer should, stake your claim and hit that subscribe button. We have a lot more great content planned for the future. Thanks. If you're a fan of anime, you may have heard of the anime Fairy Tail. Fairy Tail is a fairly upbeat and happy anime, but the card we're about to talk about that shares the same name definitely does not share the same connotation, and this card will definitely create tears in your opponent's eyes. You may have guessed it, we're talking about everyone's favorite girl, mouse, rabbit, rat thing, Fairy Tail Snow. Despite the cutesy look of the card, it is anything but that. Fairy Tail Snow has some absolutely menacing effects, featuring both a Monster Reborn and Book of Moon effect, but since it's on a monster, they don't get used up after the spell card hits the graveyard. Which means as long as you can banish 7 cards, you can summon this card as many times as you want. This will usually result in some pretty silly shenanigans that look something like this.
Fairy Tail Snow is overpowered. This card's ban-worthy. I don't even know why I got it back. It's ridiculous.
Ban-worthy.
In all seriousness though, this card can really make a gigantic board happen just because it has enough graveyard setup. Plus a multiple times per turn Book of Moon can be pretty nice as well, being able to make some boss monsters a little bit easier to deal with, like Mirror Jade for example. So for that reason, Snow is talked about a lot. Both in positive lights because people enjoy the amount of utility that it can bring to certain decks, but mostly in negative lights because people realize how insanely overpowered this card can be, and there's definitely good reason for why it was on the ban list for a while. The card obviously becomes a lot more insane when you have a deck that can mill 8 to 15 cards per turn that also utilizes a Link monster that can just immediately send Snow to the graveyard from the deck. Needless to say, the card is really good right now, and we could definitely see it whenever this next ban list comes out. The number 4 spot on this list answers the question, what if we gave an archetype that has basically no restrictions whatsoever a boss monster? Hopping on into the number 4 spot on this list is Totally Awesome. Now, Totally Awesome is not new to the Yu-Gi-Oh metagame. We've seen this guy many times before, mostly in Paleozoic Frogs, a very budget deck that could really hold its own competitively. However, making its metagame return post Power of the Elements, we have the all-powerful Sprite deck, capable of absolutely maximizing the level 2 monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh! And what just happens to be level 2s? A bunch of cards that can basically do whatever they want, because they have little to no restrictions on them. Thanks to an extremely small frog package, Gigantic Sprite can help you turbo out Totally Awesome onto the field. Then Sprite Elf will give it protection from being targeted, and then once you actually do end up negating something with Totally Awesome, Sprite Elf will be able to revive it and give you another negate. Because like many of the main deck frog monsters, Totally Awesome is a soft once per turn. And as it turns out, an extremely easy to summon monster that gives you 2 Omni Negates on a turn, has target protection, steals the card that it's negating, and can also give you more frogs, happens to be a pretty decent card. It's not hard to see why so many people were so scared of Sprite when it was first releasing, and how Sprite is still an extremely formidable deck to go up against even after the release of Power of the Elements. For these reasons, many people have called for Totally Awesome to just be banned, and there's a good chance that Konami will follow through with that. Personally speaking, I don't want them to take away my little frog stack, but it's a pretty insane card. Has an opponent ever made you feel like this? Well, that's Jesse Cotton, and in this picture, he just got hit by the number 3 spot on our list, Dimension Shifter. Of the 3 world premiere cards from the Megatins, Nibiru the Primal Being, Dimension Shifter, and Dark Ruler No More, Dimension Shifter was definitely the runt of the litter when it first came out. It didn't really see much play at all. No deck could really truly utilize it given its pretty decent restriction of not being able to have any monsters in the graveyard when you use it. But fast forward a couple years and now this card is fairly oppressive and many people want this guy gone. Unlike the prior 2 spots on this list, this card is only really able to be utilized by decks that don't really need the graveyard or don't really put anything in the graveyard. Which means we're basically talking about Flunder and Exosister, which are definitely not the best decks of the format, but they can abuse this card card like crazy. Crazy enough to win a YCS. When this YCS win was announced to the world, Twitter was up in a frenzy, calling for Dimension Shifter to be immediately emergency banned, which I think definitely constitutes some controversy. But in all truth, Dimension Shifter is a fairly balanced card. Sure, it definitely sucks to have the card resolved against you, but that's not going to happen super often. Unless there's like a million Flunder players running around to your locals, in which case I'm very sorry. But regardless, the card has a pretty deep restriction. It essentially becomes a dead card after turn 1, and it can only be utilized by very specific decks to its full potential. So in my opinion, it's pretty balanced. But that doesn't stop Twitter. Plus, it's coming out in the Crystal Base structure deck, and Konami has to sell product. You know, they've got to make money. They're a very poor, small indie company, so it's probably not going to get banned. The number 2 spot goes to a card we've had for a very long time now, and one whose name has been on many players' lips for about as long as the guy in the card art has been alive. I'm of course talking about Called by the Grave. Old Grandpa and the Friendly Zombie here want you to know that you can't use that card that you just sent to the graveyard for the entire next few turns. Called by is such a spectacular card because it can work as a regular trap card, or it just works from your hand to protect your combo from hand traps. This is of course thanks to it being a quick play spell. This means you can use it on your turn or your opponent's turn and the card will still be live. It's a 1-of at the moment, but even right now people are still calling for this card to be gone entirely. This card does a lot. It can target a monster in the opponent's graveyard and just completely get rid of it, banish it from being able to use its graveyard effects, and then it just shuts down all copies of that card as well. You want to utilize Effect Failure or Didi Crow's non-once per turn effect once you draw into another one of them? Well, you can't, because Called by the Grave shuts off everything with the same name. But in the current metagame, Called by extends past even just normal hand traps, also being able to counteract Tearlaments pretty well, because once you get rid of something like Tearlaments Merly, Tearlaments Havness, Tearlaments Rhinoheart, whatever, from the graveyard, your opponent can't use that card ever for 2 turns. That can make this card pretty oppressive, and it's no surprise that so many people want to see this on the next ban list. Personally, I think the card is sort of a necessary evil, and if Konami gets rid of it, it'll make people have to respect hand traps a lot more. But hand traps aren't really super popular right now anyway, so what do I know?
Oh, haha, Cowboy for Game. It was a new joke that Cowboy for Game. It's a joke. It's like Firewall Pass. It's just a joke. So I make a joke saying Cowboy for Game, which I did Cowboy for Game someone, but that doesn't mean I'm cheating. I'm following your time rules, Konami.
As our Lord and Savior, the Penned God, TrifGaming, is saying so eloquently in this video, the number 1 spot goes to timer stall cards, or life gain cards, or burn cards, whatever you want to call these things. There's not really one specific card, but I suppose that the most relevant one right now is probably Red Resonator, but all of these are seeing their fair share of play in a multitude of decks. Now these cards are not controversial because their effects are super overpowered, but what if I told you their effects can literally decide entire matches? The controversy behind these cards does not stem from their effects, it stems from Konami's time rules. Unfortunately, Konami doesn't really give players enough time to play out their entire match, so many players, and pretty much anyone who really wants to win at top level tournaments, is going to be citing in a timer stall card. A card that, if they summon it or send it to the graveyard or utilize its effects, will alter the life points in a favorable way for the turn player, allowing them to win a match that they would normally draw. I know that this isn't like a specific card and it's more of a set of specific cards, but these are extremely controversial right now, and plenty of players have been calling for Konami to revisit their time rules before this and now. Since this video might get a little bit of reach, if a Konami executive is watching this, you should revisit your time rules and probably change them for the better in the future. Nobody wants to lose to a Red Resonator. I guess since a big purpose of this video is to actually explain the cards and explain why they're good, I'll talk about Skullmark Ladybug. You see, a Red Resonator and Gagaga Cowboy are fairly self-explanatory, just burn your opponent with its effect, or gain life points with Red Resonator's effect. But Skullmark Ladybug is a little bit more complex. This card allows you to gain 1,000 life points when it's sent to the graveyard. And if you remember back to Fairy Tale Snow at the beginning of this list, Tearlaments are currently implementing Curious the Lightsworn Dominion into their deck, which allows them to send this card directly from their deck to the graveyard, giving them the 1,000 life points that they need. There's not really much more to say about these cards other than that though. Under Konami's time rules, if the timer runs out, the turn player will be allowed to finish their phase that they're currently in. So if you have a minute left in the clock, all you gotta do is side in Red Resonator or Skullmark Ladybug, start the game with your opponent, enter into your main phase 1, play your combo out until you can get this card's effect resolved, and then you just win the match. It doesn't feel good to win that way, and I can guarantee it doesn't feel good to lose to that either. So hopefully the timer rules see an addendum in the future. Anyway guys, that is going to end off the video. Thank you so much for checking this one out, and thank you so much for finding our channel very early on. Be sure to click that subscribe button for future content like this, and for a wide variety of team-based content that we have in the works. Be sure to like the video if you enjoyed it. Thanks again for making it to the end of the video. Again, you might as well just subscribe since you already made it here. See ya.